Hi, I'm Lynn Keddie and I paint in acrylics, and I love sharing my process so that I can help you in your painting journey. In this video I'm going to be repainting this painting. The reason for that is that I exhibited it last week and a lot of people were commenting on the unusual composition, how much they liked it, and it was different. So I kind of thought it would be great to try and revisit it. It's from a memory of me looking at the harbour at St Ives in Cornwall. So let's go ahead and start painting. So this is going to be an abstracted version of my memory of this harbour. I love experimenting with abstraction. It's a really interesting way to paint. And it really is experimentation. You have to really let go of what you see in a way, or the reality, if you like, and look at things in a slightly different way. This isn't pure abstraction, but it is looking at those elements that I remember in a slightly different way, and I'll explain it to you as I paint the picture. So I've done the sky, and it's in a very highly tinted, in other words adding lots of white to some cerulean blue. So I suppose it's cerulean blue to white really, because it's mostly white. It gives a very airy feel, and I quite like that. Now I'm going to paint in the horizon. Now I know it's an abstract and a horizon could be all over the place, but I can't stand a wonky horizon, so I'm measuring it with this ruler. I'm just making a little mark, and then I'm going to paint in the sea. Now I've written the colours I'm using in this painting in my description, so don't worry about noting them down as you watch the video. So I'm mixing up some, let me think, turquoise and a little bit of raw umber. The raw umber just it kind of knocks the brightness of the turquoise back a bit, and I've also added a tiny bit of cadmium yellow, and I've got this sort of greeny looking sea. And as you can see, I'm painting it in quite quickly just to really get the basic elements of this painting going, and that's what I'm doing. I'm just really not thinking too much, not trying to make everything perfect, and just getting the big shapes, if you like, into this painting. Now there's a very obvious element to this painting, and that's the harbour wall with the lighthouse at the end. And this is the sort of one part of the painting that is probably fairly not abstract. I think if I went back and did it again, I might change it, but for me that at the time seemed like quite an important element, so I'm trying to paint that in. I'm using a mix of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, and this makes an absolutely gorgeous sort of deep grey colour. Now I'm painting in the beach, the shoreline, using cadmium yellow, a little bit of raw umber, and quite a bit of titanium white. And as you can see, again, I'm painting it in quite quickly, and it's really just a shape. And at the moment, all the colours are quite flat, I would say. Maybe apart from the sky, which has a few wispy clouds in, which I rather like. So I'm using a fairly big brush and just getting the sense of the sand into the painting. Now I've changed my colour to using a richer turquoise mix, and I'm painting in what was the receding tide. Just adding a bit more white just to take that down a bit. And again, I'm just painting a shape essentially, because can you imagine looking down from a height onto the sea, and you will see things, shapes if you like, which you don't really see that when you're standing on the shoreline. So high above, you'll see different things. You'll see the depth of the water, the colours as the depth of the water changes, and you might see boats, you might imagine that you could see fish, for example. And that's what I was doing. I was sort of imagining what was different. So the changes in the colour of the sea are different depths of water. Now I'm really roughly painting in some rocks. Do you know, I can't even remember if there were rocks there, but it sort of anchors the painting a little bit. So I'm roughly painting these in with a mix of more raw umber than a little bit of blue. So they're sort of a browny blue colour. And I'm trying to make them different shapes. They're sort of slanted, because quite often when sort of there's a geographical name for this, a geological name for this, and I can't think what it is. But it's when land tips up, you know, like in an earthquake and stuff, and you see those lines that are sort of at a funny angle in rock. So that's kind of what's going through my mind at this point. Now, at the moment, everything, as I said, the colour's very flat. So this is a great tip, and I use this quite a lot. I get a bit of baking parchment. I can't say it, I can't speak. And I place it over the wet paint. It has to be wet, not too wet, it's drying off. And if you use your nails or a sharp object on the paper, what it does is it just lifts a little bit of the paint off and it creates fabulous marks. Now I'm getting a bristle brush to just spray some paint on the sea to get the sense of light reflecting off the water. Bristle is much better than a nylon brush for this. Just going back in with a brush to get rid of the white around the rocks, and it's slightly softened them down. And again, I'm going to get this time a brayer, which is is it a brayer? Yeah, I think it's a brayer, isn't it? I always get brayers and braddles mixed up. And I'm just running that across those rocks. And again, it's giving it a gorgeous texture. So all of a sudden, the painting has become less flat and there's more interest. So we've got the splatter in the water and we've got the lines, the marks in the sea. Now, you can imagine, looking from above, you would see things going on underneath the water, which is why I think this sort of is a great way of describing it, if you like. Again, I'm using a slightly different colour, another shape, and I'm painting that in quite roughly. There's a little mix of different blues and turquoises in this particular part of the painting, and I'm happy with that. Again, using my straight edge. So I've got some very bold lines, which you wouldn't necessarily expect to see in the sea. But I like that effect. I like the effect that I've got with that. I'm going back in and I'm working on that harbour wall again. Still haven't attempted the lighthouse, which is a bit of detail, and I'm not great on detail. Now I'm doing a different technique, and you know, I've never done this before, but I think it's great. The paint is still wettish, it's not completely wet, and I'm drawing with my finger some swirls, and it's just lifting a tiny bit of paint off, and I just think that's pretty cool, actually. And then the paint that's been lifted off on the parchment paper, you can then print on different parts of the painting, which is what I'm doing now. I'm going to put in the surf, the waves breaking on the beach, quite roughly with a slightly bluish white mix of paint, and putting waves in the distance as well. And then I'm dragging that further onto the beach. And this describes wet sand, if you like, and the way the light reflects off it. The painting's coming together fairly quickly. I've got the basic elements now and I'm pleased with those. And it's just now about experimentation and seeing how I can add depth, add texture, add interest to the painting. And it's all about differences. It's all about different marks that I can create, which gives the eye something exciting to look at, to be honest. Here I've got the back of the end of the paintbrush, the wrong end of the paintbrush, and I'm drawing into the sand over the baking parchment. And that's made some quite interesting marks. Again, I'm using it to draw into the harbour wall so that I can again have different marks. So it's gone from being just flat colour to much more interesting shapes and marks. Now, I'm attempting the lighthouse. I can quite honestly say I'm not really enjoying this part of it. I'm just getting on with it. So I remember seeing it back in just before Christmas. I was there with a friend and I remember thinking, gosh, in my original painting I made the lighthouse far too tall and skinny. It's actually quite short and stubby. So that's what I'm doing here. So from going from an sort of abstracted painting, I'm now trying to paint this stupid lighthouse accurately. Oh well. I'm just putting in a little bit of reddy orange colour into that harbour wall just to, again, just add a little bit of interest. Now, the one interesting part of the original painting, and I'm going to put it into this painting, were the marks that I made for strange objects in the sea. This was a representation of a fish, and I'm using a mix of cadmium yellow medium and cadmium red light, and I've got an orangey mix, but it's actually quite thin, it's quite transparent, and you can see the blue through it. So I've sort of wiped that off for now because it wasn't really working, so I'm going to have to think about how to adjust that. I've also got a round shape in the sea that could represent a ball or a buoy, or if you're in America, I think it's called a buoy. And this other very strange shape that I had in the original painting, which is like an upside down, no, it's not, it's actually like a spoon, not an upside down spoon, a spoon. Now I'm using this orange mix, but I don't think it's working. Tonally, it's very similar to the blue, and it's, as I said, quite transparent, so it's not really showing up. So I'm going to have to go back and work on this and add more paint to it, and I'm also going to change the colour so that tonally it stands out much more. So this is a much paler yellow colour I'm using now. And what is this funny shape? What does it actually represent? Well, it almost looks like a slightly deconstructed yacht. So I don't know if you can sort of see it. It's like a yacht that's sort of the bottom bit, the spoon end of it is like the actual body of the yacht, and the bit that's sticking out is like the mast, which is maybe collapsed. So maybe it's a ship in distress, a yacht in distress, I don't know. But I just like it. It's funny, it's quirky, and it makes people say, well, what on earth is that? Now, this is starting to work much better. Tonally, it's different from the sea, and now these shapes jump out at you. I'm going back into that harbour wall, and as you can see, it genuinely does look like probably the only thing on that painting that, well, maybe the sea, I guess, that is not terribly abstracted. So now what I'm doing really is, once I've got the main elements of the painting sorted, I'm just developing each one of them to make them more interesting and to make the painting more interesting. Now I'm trying to get some surf across those rocks. I'm using a big brush and it's just not working. It's sort of working in this part of the sea, so that's adding a little more interest there. And now I'm putting it around the coast, where not the coastline, where the tide is going out. So when something isn't working, get that baking paper out again and try and move it around a bit. I'm using my fingers to just soften some of those boulder marks. And I'm knocking that colour back a bit because it's just not really working. But you can see the sharp tonal difference between the rocks and the sea, and that makes it an interesting juxtaposition of shapes, if you like. And also the fact that the rocks are ragged and the horizon is very straight and the tide is, I can only think of one word, and it's swishy. So you've got lots of different things going on, lots of different shapes, lots of different textures, lots of different tonal differences. And I'm adding a mark in here, which there is a jetty on this beach, and I don't know where it is in relation to the harbour, I just can't remember. But that's kind of what this is. And the reason why I'm putting this in is just to draw your eye around to this part of the painting. Otherwise it's sort of a bit lost. There's not a lot going on there. I'm going back in now and I'm trying to get these shapes to work. So I'm applying more paint and they're becoming more obvious. It's amazing when you're painting how you can really lose yourself in it and time starts to really fly by. It's a very meditative, oh, that's such a difficult word to say, meditative, I think I've got too many syllables in it, I can't say it, you know what I'm talking about. You know, you can just lose yourself completely, and it's a great way of relaxing. You know, when life is stressful enough, this is a way to really, really relax and to experiment. I think it's so important to experiment. I was talking to somebody last week and he was looking at my work and saying, well, you've got abstracts and you've got landscapes and the style seems to be different. And I didn't really take that as a compliment. I don't think he meant it as a compliment. I think he was confused. I don't really know what he meant, to be honest. But the way I look at it is that it's important to develop your work. So your work might change dramatically over a period of time. And I don't think there's a problem in that. I mean, look at Picasso. If you see his early work, it's incredibly representational and amazing. But then he went through various periods where he changed his work very dramatically. Which made him, I think, quite unusual in the sense of a painter. So he went through a blue period. He may have gone through various others, but they certainly, you wouldn't expect the final paintings that he painted to be what they are, because if you saw his original work, it was very traditional. So what I'm saying really is, I think it's really important to try things out and mix things up a bit and see what you can get out of it. I'm putting more highlights in with the bristle brush and white paint, and that's working so much better. It's a better method to get that spray from the sea over the rocks, and I really like that now. As you can see, I've done probably about 3 or 4, maybe 5 layers of paint on these shapes in the water. And that's really just to get them clear, because before you just missed them. I want to get more texture into the deconstructed yacht. I love that. I called the original painting, what did I call it? I called it Breakfast at St Ives, and it was because of that spoon shape in the water, because one of my favourite films is Breakfast at Tiffany's, and I don't know, it just suddenly came to me. I'll call this Breakfast at St Ives too. That's so original. So I'm just really now finishing up, just adding a little bits and pieces of marks, which aren't really anything in particular, but just adding to the overall impression that I'm trying to give. So you can see now from the first layers of paint, which were very flat and very simple, that we've now added more interest with all the little bits and pieces that we're adding in. The different tools that we're using, the different colours, the different marks. I mean, what you could do is paint another painting using the same shapes, but using completely different colours. So the area where the sky is could be purple, the area where the sea is could be, I don't know, yellow, and an experiment like that and just see what it looks like. It's kind of like an Andy Warhol type of thing, where he used the same photograph, but he printed them in different colours. You know, I think I might try that. So as I say, I'm just doing lots of finishing up bits. I'm using a palette knife here to get those waves on the sea, and that works so much better for me. It's more assured, it's more obvious. And again, using it on the shoreline, the palette knife and the white, and it just, again, this is sort of like the, I don't know, third or fourth time layer I've put over it. I haven't, the underlayers haven't disappeared altogether, they're still there, and that's what's important. Sometimes if you just paint over something completely, you lose all the lovely little bits that maybe weren't working perfectly before, but by just adding a little something, they all work together, and it just makes for a better painting. It's like 1 and 1 makes 5. So what I'm doing now is I've got my rigger brush, that's my very thin sable brush, and I'm very lightly painting in some swirls of a pale orangey, burnt orangey sort of colour onto the beach. That's because there was one on there, a mark like that on there, which I really liked. Now, what does this represent? Well, I was thinking of another painting that I did, and I called it Ghost Nets. Ghost nets are the nets that fishermen cut loose from their boats if they're tied up or something, or I don't know why they do it. But basically it's a really awful thing that they're doing, because they're letting these nets loose in the sea, and they float around and they trap marine life and kill it. And I painted a picture with a net in it, and I called it Ghost Nets. So I'm putting that element into this painting because it kind of rang as a bit of an alarm bell to me, to know that actually happened, and it does. So I'm now painting them into the sea. They're very fine lines. You don't really see them that well. Tonally, they're quite similar to the colours that I'm painting on, but if you get close to the painting, you will see them. And that is a way of adding depth to your story. Not everything is visible from a distance. The elements that draw you into this painting will be the funny shapes and just the general composition. And then as you get closer, you'll see all the details. And sometimes when you use tonal value like that, where it's quite similar, you can do some quite interesting things. Now I'm finishing off this painting by just adding a little bit more interest to this deconstructed yacht. And I think I'm nearly there. I think if I carry on much longer, I'll just spoil it. So I'm going to go away, I'm going to let it dry, and I'm going to see what I think of it. So I've come back and I've realised that the lighthouse exactly meets the horizon, so it kind of looks wrong. So I've just made that a little bit taller, and I'm putting in a little dark mark on the horizon on the right hand side, just to give the viewer's eye something to glance at on that side of the painting. And here are the details. These are the splats of paint, the lighthouse, the deconstructed yacht, and the swirls, which could represent underwater currents, the lines in the sea, and those little orange marks on the beach. So there you have it. Breakfast at St Ives, take 2. If you like this video, do hit the subscribe button, and then you'll never miss another one. I share lots of tips and ideas to help you improve your painting. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.